Welcome to this week's episode of Business Solutions, where we provide solutions on formed lifestyles. My name is Kingsley Oluoko, and if you're new to the channel, ensure you subscribe, share and like the video to share this message to other small businesses and big businesses in particular on this message as we provide solutions on formed lifestyles. And even as we wrap up the 2024 financial year, we want to understand the landscape of MSMEs and their performance, the general overlook and their review during this particular financial year. And so to unpack this, I'm joined by a MSMEs, a global award winner, name it all. I will be introducing himself and what he does and why he does this. Welcome so much, sir.
Thank you very much, Kingsley.
Give us a brief intro of who you are. Really, your portfolio is big.
So simply put, my name is Victor Agalla. Mm-hmm. I'm the managing director of VIFFA Consult, based here in Nairobi. We've been in operation for the last 10 years or so. Our focus basically is around supporting MSMEs as well as startups, with a focus on doing research that can be able to support evidence-based SME intervention in terms of people who support SMEs, as well as policy evidence that can be able to drive policy, meaning that we champion for a lot of MSME policies, both at the county as well as national government.
Okay. In a 10 years span working with MSMEs and startups, you clearly have the vision board and then can understand and assess. What has been your general overlook for this year?
I think this year has not been any different, at least from a policy standpoint. Generally, if you go back and look at data from KNBS, the average mortality rate of SMEs is around 75%. So what basically that means is 3 out of 5 businesses close. And of course, there are various challenges that continues to hinder the significant growth, and of course is leading to death of SMEs. Issues around access to finance, which has continued to be a challenge. Issues around access to market, policy environment that is not as conducive, and a myriad of different other challenges. Of course, having systematic issues such as war in Ukraine, looking at elections, and a lot of disturbances that really impact SMEs. And the reason I say this impacts SMEs is because if you look at the way our entrepreneurs in Kenya have invested in terms of business, is a lot of them have invested in wholesale retail. So meaning that a lot of us in Kenya buy stuff, whether from Turkey, from China, and come resell. So by the very nature of these types of business, of course, looking at mama mboga, nyanyas, itunguza, etc., it means that a majority of entrepreneurs or SMEs struggle because, of course, other than the external issues that they face, these sectors, of course, are very weak in terms of business model. You can go to Kikomba and find 1 million or 1,000 people selling the same product. So it means the profit margins are very thin. There's nothing that differentiates you from the next person.
Okay.
So you are just waking up, living literally hand to mouth. And I think that's the general sense, at least from a global perspective. Coming to this year, of course, looking at the different the heightened political environment, and of course a lot of disturbances with the Gen Zs and stuff, and of course looking at where SMEs are investing, it means that of course they had a lot of struggle because of disturbance, of course ad floods and the rest. Okay. So this combination of things is really has made the environment very difficult for a lot of MSMEs in Kenya, and generally I think in Africa as well.
And we are in a space where politically the government came in with a narrative of empowering the MSMEs. 2 years in, what's your overlook? Has it been achieved? Do we see an inclination to an upward trajectory compared to other previous years and even in the previous regime?
Yeah, so I think the regime, we've not seen any significant change, at least from an intervention perspective. At least from a transformative manner, in the sense that the way to gauge is to look at the manifesto that the current government had put in, which was ingrained into government through the medium-term plan 4. and specifically focusing on interventions around SMEs, the question you ask is, say for example, Affirmative Action Fund, which is popularly known as Hustler Fund. The question is, has it been, transformative? Of course, we've seen challenges even from the Office of the Auditor General, indicating that this fund did not function as well.
Yeah.
But also generally, if you look at it as a model, it's not transformational in the sense that what it does is it's a cash flow product. So meaning that if I'm selling tomatoes, I'm only able to add an extra tomato to buy. The question is, does that remove you from a poverty cycle, given that you understand that these sectors are already very difficult?
Okay.
So the profit margins are very difficult to achieve. So I think that, in a sense, to some degree, you can say it has lended, and of course there are people who have gained.
Okay.
But in the global perspective, in terms of we want to create significant jobs in the economy, do you think? I don't think it's been able to achieve that. The other programs, the county aggregation industrial parks, which also is within the budget policy statement, and of course is within the manifesto. A lot of them have not broken ground. They have not materialized. The conceptualization around it is not also as good, because again, it's year 2, we are going to a third year. Nothing is happening. So again, we can see challenges around the same. So a number of based on the program areas that the government has put out. In terms of support to SMEs, I think with more needs to be done. I feel like even a good example would be when we had floods. There was absolutely no response or a respite for SMEs, and we know a lot of them were affected. So the government moved on as if nothing happened. So I think we can feel the struggle, and of course now the biggest issue that we see here is the incessant push by government to collect tax. And of course, this is a big issue, given that we know that SMEs continue to struggle. Government support is not coming through, but on one hand, we are seeing a very strong push for them to be able to collect taxes from SMEs.
And even as you mentioned, this kind of challenges that they have been facing, the economic factors and the market factors for MSMEs, including inflation, the exchange rates, talking about the global economic conditions, the war in Ukraine, I know startups and MSMEs are pretty much young into the business as compared to others, but in these volatile situations, how have they been able to bounce back? Are there mechanisms of such sort?
There's no bounce back here. There's no bounce back, just to be very clear. I think, of course, like I said, if you look at the way the economic infrastructure architecture of Kenya, is that agriculture is a main driver of the economy. On one end, contributing directly around 20% and indirectly almost 40% to GDP. So of course, agriculture of course is affected with rains, but also the input in terms of fuel and of course exchange rate in terms of selling products out there. So of course that is a struggle, and I don't think there is a way of gaming high cost of fuel. There's no way you can game high cost of electricity. I mean, these are inputs that you have to incur. You have to incur. Of course, you have fertilizer and all these inputs, which, by the way, other than just being high, of course, there is also addition of taxes. So we see addition of taxes in fuel. We see addition of taxes in a number of inputs. Electricity, of course, being as high as it is. And if you have to look at SMEs, transport becomes a major issue, because if you're doing wholesale retail, it means that you're doing quite a bit of transportation. So it means that your overall cost goes high. So I think the only way around building resilience is just to try to cut back. In terms of expenditure, we've seen even from bigger companies, we are seeing bigger companies closing or relocating from Kenya to other regions. It tells you that there is real impact, and I think it's high time really for government to really focus on the cost of doing business. So yes, there is pressure to reduce the fiscal deficit, for them to collect revenue and be able to do whatever programs, pay debt, etc. But I think there has to be a very deliberate conversation around the ease of doing business. How do we support SMEs, startups, in a manner that allows them to grow? Then of course, then be able to tax them on a incremental level. Rather than just saying, we are coming for you, we are going to tax you through tills, we are going to tax you through this. I don't think that would work, and I think possibly it could be counterproductive.
Most banks or even financial institutions have tuned into being the sole providers to these MSMEs, we've had so many reports on financing, partnerships coming up on board. Have they sufficed the needs of MSMEs in terms of financing, which is a thorny issue that affects the running of the operations of MSMEs?
For sure. Again, if you look at data, 90% of what we call MSMEs are micro, meaning that these are businesses that are doing turnovers of less than 500,000 annually. So that's an average of 40 to 50K a month. For the last number of years, close to 5 years, looking at CBK reports, banks are historically and traditionally risk averse, and you would see that a lot of revenue that comes through the financial ecosystem is through buying of government bonds and bills. Because of course, for a risk averse institution, where would you place your money? You place your money where you have the least risk, but you also are able to get a higher return. So compared between the two clients or two customers from a financial perspective, the major focus has always been on buying government securities as a way of staying afloat. And we've seen, if you look at the banking portfolio in terms of loan towards MSMEs, it's actually been not less than 20% of their full loan book. And if you look at specifically the people that they're lending, they're not micro businesses, they're not small businesses, they're towards medium types of businesses. So I think financial access has remained a problem. I think that's why we've seen government saying we want to bring a product to the market that can be able to cater for the micro and small through Hustler Fund. But I think the model has to change in one way or another. I think we've seen entities, digital lenders under the Digital Financial Lenders Association of Kenya deploy a different model for lending to SMEs. They are not using collateral. What is stopping government from having collaborations with these types of lenders, so that they can be able to adopt a different model to allow for SMEs to be able to access funding, not just for cash flow, but for funding that can unlock value. You want to buy a machine, you want to buy whatever you need to buy, which is an asset that can allow you to be able to grow outside of wholesale retail. I think that's the challenge we still face. I'm hoping that maybe as we move forward, either through the Hustler Fund or any other affirmative action fund, maybe government can start exploring other lending models that does not rely on collateral. And
so comparatively, how will you measure access to loans and debts to focus on equity?
So if you look at equity, the equity conversation happens within the startup ecosystem. So if you look at an SME, rarely would you find an investor wanting to invest in a butchery. I mean, they don't need you to invest in a butchery or to invest in real estate. So from an SME perspective, largely it's driven by debt, in the sense that because it's a repeatable business model. So if you have a butchery, you can say, I want to buy more stock, or I want to go into a new location. So that's the basis of getting some sense of access to credit. Again, it depends with your credit scoring, your ability to be able to get collateral, etc. But from an equity perspective, that conversation is largely within the startup ecosystem, where we are looking at entrepreneurs who are using technology innovation to be able to solve a certain challenge. And of course, that business model has to be scalable in some way. So that becomes an incentive for an equity investor to say, hey, look, I would want to come into this business in a big way from an equity perspective, so that I can be able to enjoy dividend rather than just to get interest.
I hear you. I want to go into the topic that you're big on. What happened in December last year, 2023, when you get fitted for before then? How has the adoption of technology come in for MSMEs this year?
We did a study around a degree of adoption of digital technologies around SMEs. What we saw from the study is a lot of SMEs are adopting digital tools that are correlated with revenue. So if it's either Instagram or WhatsApp or Facebook, you see a lot of people making sales, or a lot of SMEs making sales through these platforms, because it makes sense. I mean, even if I'm going to pay to boost a post, even if I'm going to get a social media influencer to really influence my products for me to make sales, that is to a large degree where we are seeing the adoption of technology. Then as they grow, then of course you get into more complex or a bit more complicated types of technology around, customer relationship modules, etc., HR modules, but it's a factor of growth.
Okay.
So that's where we see a lot of adoption taking place. Mostly you'll see people advertising and selling through IG, through Facebook, through TikTok and stuff. So that's where we see a lot of adoption taking place. Of course, then maybe with systematic support, possibly then we can be able to see a greater adoption of other types of technologies by small medium businesses.
Okay, maybe in figuratively, will you have maybe the level of adoption as we speak?
Yeah, so I'm not, of course, we did a sample. So I think, like I said, I think a majority, I think maybe close to 80% of these people that we sampled were saying that we are using WhatsApp to sell, we are using IG to sell, we are using TikTok to sell. That's where, we are seeing a great amount of adoption taking place in terms of technology.
And what's the kind of reaction they're receiving on government plans now to have more taxes on it? I will just think it's something that people are adapting into then, before it is too much gone.
Yeah, so so you realize that, based on the sector investment of entrepreneurs, given that they're in wholesale retail, and of course, if you buy wholesale retail, means that everyone is in that business. So if it's selling tomatoes, if it's selling clothes, everyone is in that space. So the profit margins are thin. So what government has said is, instead of look, you filing returns, because it's very expensive, it's very complicated. They're saying either they will go with turnover tax. That was a conversation that started a few years back. There was conversation around digital taxation will take a certain percentage of your turnover as tax. So I think from a government perspective, there has to be a clear understanding of who the SMEs are, then try to have formalization and taxation as a byproduct of support. So I think if you look at the supply side of money from a government perspective, is we are seeing government spending money or money being wasted. To a large degree, we see corruption cases, we see a lot of wastage within ministries. So the biggest resistance that we are seeing is, yes, you're saying you want to collect tax, but on the other hand, we see 60% of the money that is allocated towards the budget goes towards corrupt people. So of course you're going to get resistance. But I think if, like I said, if government is able to specifically drill down on good programs that can be able to expand the market for SMEs. Let's say, for example, currently we have an EPA, Economic Partnership Agreement with the European Union. It's a 500 million market. Is there a deliberate effort to ensure that SMEs are able to access these markets? There are a lot of markets out there. We see China, we see Vietnam and India also moving up the value chain in terms of manufacturing. They're using more of technology. Kenya still has cheap labor. Can we be able to bring those manufacturing outsourcing to Kenya? Once we start seeing those programs, then taxation is not an issue, because already I can see I have good runway, I have good profits, I have good sales. I don't think having the conversation of tax would be a problem. But if we talk about taxation as an end by itself, saying that governments needs money to run, and of course we are seeing either corruption or going to recurrent expenditures, then of course you're going to see a lot of resistance from the taxpayers and from SMEs.
Okay. And before I even go further, I will want to mention the adoption of AI and AI tools, which is the game changer in technology, and even adoption in their marketing strategies and all that. How has it been playing out this year, which we have had so much hue over it?
Yeah, so so a lot of emerging technology, of course, looking at the global north, we see a significant adoption, significant infrastructure going into it. Because when you talk about emerging technologies, there is some foundational infrastructure that are needed. Looking at data centers, looking at talent, etc. So I think largely, from a Kenyan perspective, what my observations are is we still are largely a net consumer of a lot of these emerging technologies. So if you talk about ChatGPT, who in Kenya has ChatGPT? We are all we are marveled at it, but again we are consuming it. We are not producing it. So I think it's high time for us to shift the conversation to ask ourselves what are those foundational ingredients that are needed for us to really extract value from emerging technologies, whether it's blockchain, whether it's AI, etc. So far as we continue to be consumers of the technology and get the hype we are not gaining. Yes, your work is made easier now. You can write a story quickly through ChatGPT. I mean, you can be able to use integrate AI in many things.
Yeah.
But the question from an economic perspective or from a policy perspective is, what are we doing to ensure that we are able to train talent? We're able to train Kenyans to be practitioners within that space. We're able to build data centers that would allow for these types of machine learning, etc., big data, etc., to be harnessed. Okay. I think that's the conversation that we need to start to have around AI and emerging technology.
So clearly its adoption is high. Now we need to change the conversation.
From a consumer perspective, the adoption is high. Of course, Kenya is a very good space to be able to, at least from an innovation perspective, to be able to test out a lot of products. So we see a lot of testing of products that is happening in Kenya, because Kenyans are very, have a good appetite for emerging technologies. But ultimately, the funding, the money that or the value that is being created does not reside in Kenya. So when you do a subscription to ChatGPT, you're not paying Victor or any other person or Kingsley or whatever. So I mean, that flight of capital has to shift from going out to coming in.
And looking ahead, I know we are coming from post-pandemic recoveries and all that, uncertain economic situations, talking about resilience and how SMEs are becoming resilient. Are they prioritizing sustainability? Have you seen efforts to come following up the SDG goals and all that? What's your overview of it?
So I think Kenyans generally are extremely resilient. If you look at, even the number of fires that take place at Gikomba or Toy Market, you will always see them bounce back. And this bounce back is not from government, is not from banks, or is not from insurance. It's just from the fact that a lot of SMEs, based on maybe the insufficient support from government, have built out some resilience mechanism. So you'd find a lot of SMEs are in chamas. So a lot of these chamas actually have a lot of money that are used either to lend to the group as working capital, or as insurance, or even in case of death, you find that it's these platforms that they use for resilience. So I think that's where we see, and that's why you see a big push by a lot of SMEs saying, we don't want to be formalized. Why? Is because we don't see, or they don't see significant support coming from the formal economy, either banks, insurance, or even government. But the conversation around sustainability, I think, is an non-starter from an SME perspective. So someone who's trying to survive to sell tomatoes on a day, that is not a conversation that they should have. It's like asking me, would you prefer butter or ghee? And I'm hungry. I just need food. So I think generally where I see the issue of sustainability coming into play is from the people who support SMEs, or what we call ESOs, entrepreneur support organizations. I think maybe they have a role in terms of trying to inculcate practices around SDGs to the programs that they have in terms of supporting both SMEs and startups. Then maybe possibly then you can be able to see some results or some impact coming
that
from
have come. Speaking of results, how has different industries and sectors performed compared to the others? If you'll have an overview or even figurative answer to that.
So I think one of the biggest cogs, of course, in terms of economic growth has been agriculture. And of course, the last number of months we've seen good rains. So usually there is a direct correlation between good rains and, of course, the good performance of agriculture, which means, of course, inflation or the cost of goods goes down. So agriculture is a major sector that I think we've seen growth. Manufacturing for a long time, I think over the last number of years, has declined in terms of GDP contribution. So of course, service coming and taking up that space. And from a service perspective, we see issues around tourism, issues around financial institutions who've done very well, of course, lending to government. So generally, that's where we see a strong performance of two key sectors.
And do we have those who are in the decline, or loss-making?
Construction, like I said, manufacturing has for years has been declining, and of course, in terms of contribution.
Okay.
I think the last CBK report, if I'm not wrong, construction, which was also a major contributor, was also cooling off to some degree in terms of seeing that sector grow. Transport as a sector, of course, from an international perspective, is correlated to inflows in terms of tourism. So usually, if you look at flights, of course, these tourists have to come through flights.
Okay.
So there has been average performance around tourism, but largely where we see or we lack, we fail as a country is just a real focus on manufacturing, and specifically cottage manufacturing. Because I think if you look at, say for example, the entire population of manufacturers, 5% are the big ones, 95% are cottage manufacturers. So these are the Juakali artisans, etc. So I think that is where I think we've not figured out a solution. Hopefully then, of course, this comes into consideration to the ministers of industry.
I've also, we can't really miss out on the emerging technologies, fintech, health tech, green technologies. How has their performance been?
So largely, if you look at the growth of the startup ecosystem in Kenya for the last 10 years, it has been largely driven by fintech, meaning, and of course, the correlation here is that because a lot of SMEs, a lot of people are not able to access formal financial loans and facilities, it meant that they were able to access it through digital credit providers. And of course, with investors seeing a high return on investment, a high payback period, it means that a lot of funding has gone into fintech. Over the last number of years, we've seen Kenya at least hold around 17% of all VC money coming into Africa. That's a big portion, of course, if you're to compare the population compared to Nigeria, Egypt, and the likes. So that has been some significant growth has taken place in that front. Of course, with the M-Pesa also being a key
player in the sector,
a flag bearer around the same sector. So, but I think the others, of course, also I think issues around solar. So again, because of lack of access to electricity in rural areas, has pushed for that to happen. So the rest of the sectors have been lagging behind the two sectors. And I think again, it's also high time for us to be able to really rejig our ecosystem to allow for private sector players to be able to come. Provide financing either in terms of angel investment or even venture capital fund. There's a lot of money sitting in pension funds. So there's a lot of money sitting in chamas. There's a lot of money sitting in real estate. I mean, if we're able to channel those funds into other sectors, health, ag-tech, education, technology, etc., then I think we should be able to see significant or maturity of the startup ecosystem in Kenya.
Okay. Looking ahead now, we're closing the year, we're beginning a new year. What are some of the best practices that you would recommend for MSMEs? I know you've mentioned a couple, even as you were tackling some of the topic that we're talking about. Success stories, maybe if you could highlight some of them, and the future outlook. What strategies in terms of marketing diversification could MSMEs adopt, even as we wrap up the show?
I think the formula is already there. We know sectors that have high or good returns. Innovation or startups or doing something around the same. I think it's something that is profitable if it's done right. Blue economy, there are opportunities within the blue economy which has not been exploited for a number of years. Manufacturing, we don't manufacture as we should. If you look at the import bill and the different things that we import, up to toothpicks, up to tomato sauce and stuff. So there's an opportunity around manufacturing. Agribusiness, in the sense that can we be able to do significant agriculture at scale, not as peasant farmers or anything, but just being able to do it at scale, because agriculture is just a question of scale. Value addition in agriculture is also something that, of course, links to manufacturing. If you look at crepes, if you look at peanut butter, there's a lot of stuff. I was talking to an entrepreneur the other day who was saying, I don't know, they've picked some wild fruits, I don't know don't know from where, and decided to make gin out of it. And the gin actually is among the very best in the world. I was like, I mean, who would have thought? Oh no, who would have thought about that? Yeah, so I mean, the opportunities are out there. I think the easy option is always now, and of course, we have a big culture of looking for employment. So that's always one of the overarching challenges that we have as a country. Okay. Where, you know, unless you work for Pearl Radio, no one takes you seriously. The rest of us who are in the Jokali sector or are hustling out, people don't take you seriously. Even yourself, you don't take yourself seriously. So I think a question of culture, which then informs how hard you go in terms of putting yourself out there around business. So you can't do business half-heartedly. You can't do side hustle. You can't do it via telephone. It is something that you really have to put in effort, resources, research, for you to be able to really see a value in the market. Otherwise, if you go for low-hanging fruits of just buying stuff, suits from Turkey come to resell in Kenya, the same, I think you will struggle. But for those people who've gone into these sectors that I've mentioned, I think over time, or in the fullness of time, have seen real value coming back to them.
There you have it from Victor, MSME's VIFFA consultant. Thank you so much, sir, for the invaluable input that I've had from you on the MSME's landscape in the country and even what you're projecting to the coming year. My name is Kingsley Oluoko for Business Solutions, where we provide solutions on formed lifestyles. Until next time.